Hello, everyone, and welcome to this wonderful and exciting SciFest Africa and SAAO, which is the South African Astronomical Observatory collaboration. This year, the SAAO are celebrating 200 years of existence. That is just about 50 years less than I've been around. And of course, this is one of those major milestones that has birthed this collaboration between SciFest Africa and the SAAO. And of course, because October is a special month, we also have World Space Week during this month. They have chosen to work together with SciFest to produce a month of space and astronomy. And today our topic is going to be the Artemis plan, and that is NASA's Lunar Exploration Program overview. And the presentation today is going to be an overview of NASA's Artemis plan, how we will return to the moon once again, and how we will use the moon as a stepping stone for our next greatest leap, and that would be the human exploration of Mars. And of course, it gives me a great pride and privilege to invite our very special presenter. Our guest will be Bianca Rhyme. And Bianca, you can switch on your camera so we can see where you are. Maybe you are there. You are there. Excellent. Bianca, I just want to introduce her. She is a member of the Engineering Directorate at NASA John F. Kennedy Space Center, otherwise known affectionately as the KSC. She provides electrical engineering design, test, maintenance, troubleshooting, and support for commercial resupply service launch operations to the ISS, which is the International Space Station, including critical late stow transport and integration of science experiments and cargo into the SpaceX Dragon capsule. She is a communications subject matter expert with the Deep Space Directorate, and she provides electrical engineering support for the Artemis program's Gateway Logistics Services and Human Landing System, and in addition to the other research and technology programs and projects. But of course, Bianca is a very, very well-known friend of SciFest. She has attended many SciFests before, and I have also had the privilege of working with Bianca in Cape Town. We got to visit some schools as well, and she is a rocking science communicator. So I am going to invite you, Bianca. You can unmute yourself, and I'm going to give you the chance to just share what you would like to tell everyone about the Artemis project.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that introduction.
Is your camera on? Are you sharing your screen?
I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. I think my camera might went off because I'm sharing my screen.
Okay,
so,
no problem.
Yeah, I think that's one of my limitations using the browser version. But hopefully I'll show you my face at the end and you can ask tons of questions, and hopefully I'll answer a bunch too. But listening to Steve's introduction, I'm like, gosh, I do a lot of different things, but it's interesting thinking about that from another perspective. So I guess we'll start with today. I'm going to talk to you really a high-level overview of the Artemis plan and tell you a little bit more detail about how the work that I do fits into that. So a little housekeeping first is just to say that, most of the time, a lot of times I meet people and they say, wow, you work at NASA, and NASA does amazing things, and that's true. And we do that with really ordinary people who are committed, enabled, and empowered to make these big projects come to be. So I like to just kind of start by telling everybody, like, I'm not like somebody on Big Bang Theory or something. I'm just a regular person who is willing to apply herself to do some extraordinary things. So kind of start with that. So Steve kind of gave a breakdown. I work with three main programs at NASA. I work with the International Space Station program. So I help integrate payloads from development all the way through launch and checkout into the Dragon capsule. And it's pretty fun and exciting to go onto the launch pad and load that cargo into the Dragon, into the cargo bay. So that's one of my fun things I get to do. I also provide some insight for NASA's Human Landing System program, and that is the vehicle, the spacecraft that's going to take astronauts from their orbiting lunar platform, kind of outpost in the lunar vicinity, down to the lunar surface. And right now we have 3 commercial providers kind of competing for an upcoming down selection to 2 providers. So we'll find out soon which 2 providers will be selected. And then another thing that I really enjoy doing is working with deep space logistics. And right now we're working on some projects for lunar communication in the vicinity of the moon, because it's a challenge, because it requires that direct line of sight, and the landing sites that we're looking for on the far side of the moon and at the lunar south pole don't always have sight with the Earth. So we have to use a couple of tricks to make that possible. So I want to get the tough questions out of the way first. The thing that everybody always asks, and that is, how do astronauts use the potty in space? So I have a video. Steve's going to share the video, and we'll check that out pretty quickly.
Hello, I'm NASA astronaut Jessica Meir. I recently spent 205 days on board the International Space Station. This is Ask NASA.
Hello, my name is Sana. When people practice to be astronauts, how do they practice? You can't just pull away gravity from a place. No, you can't, because it's invisible. You can't see it. So how do they practice?
Well, Santa, that is a great question. It is something that all of the NASA engineers and personnel have been perfecting on the ground for us in order to train us effectively as astronauts. We do it underwater in a really big pool called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. Underwater, we can mimic some of those effects. We can maintain what we call neutral buoyancy, where we don't float up and we don't sink down. We also have an entire replica of the International Space Station where we can learn and train in the inside of the space station. It was really interesting for a launch because we have spent so many hours training and learning how to fly the spacecraft. I actually had to remind myself, wow, this is real this time. So it was incredibly exciting to finally start feeling those things. You could feel the engines ignite, and you can feel the acceleration on your body. And then after only about 8 minutes, you're suddenly weightless. And then you would realize, okay, this is real. This one's going to actually carry me to space. We are able to bring a few items with us, some personal items that you want to support throughout your mission. One of the things that I brought was my piccolo. I also flew my panda bear, Pandemonium, who has been with me since I was 6 years old. He's been to the Antarctic, he's been traveling all around the planet, and now he's also been to space. So for me, my schedule, I was able to maintain about the same number of hours. Some people sleep much better in space than they do on Earth because they don't have things like sore knees or backs. Without gravity pushing down on you, what we have is a sleeping bag, and we have that up against one of the walls, and it's strapped to one of the walls so that you can kind of keep yourself in position. I would zip myself in the sleeping bag, and I also had a little belt that I wrapped around the middle, and I could put my arms down and try to keep them down sometimes. Sometimes I actually slept with my arms up over my head like that. Usually people like to secure themselves a little bit so you're not just kind of free floating everywhere and then kind of waking yourself up. Just like everything else, going to the bathroom in space is something that you have to get used to. One of the best things is to get training from all of your crewmates that have already been up there and already used to using everything like the toilet. And how that works, we actually use like a vacuum system. So imagine if you have a vacuum cleaner and you're sucking things down. We turn on a big fan, and so that's pulling everything down into the toilet. We have a long funnel that we use to collect all of the urine. And then there's another seat that you can sit on, again, with that fan pulling things through to collect everything and keep it contained, which of course is the most important part on the space station. You don't want to have everything floating around. floating around. And it was really interesting for me in the beginning, in those first few days, your body is sensing things differently too without gravity. You know, everything, including your internal organs, everything is kind of lifted up. And so some of those pressure sensors that give you that feeling that you need to go to the bathroom, that feeling of fullness in your bladder, that takes a little bit of time to adjust to space as well. So we're actually getting a new toilet on board the International Space Station. This new toilet is going to be a little bit easier to use for both men and women. Of course, there are some anatomical differences, and some of the earlier versions didn't take into account everything equally kind of for both men and women. So this one should be a little bit easier to use for everybody. It'll also increase the capacity. We'll have another toilet on board the space station. We can continue to test and refine these technologies that will be used on the future in the Orion spacecraft when astronauts return to the moon. Most female astronauts actually suppress their menstrual cycle when we go on our space missions, just to make things a little bit more convenient. It certainly is not a requirement. All of those functions can go exactly as they do down on Earth. We have supplies up there as needed, and we can accommodate it with all of the hardware that we have for the toilet. To wash our hair, we take a drink bag, just like the normal drink bags we use. So I'll get my hair nice and wet, and you have to just take that water and get it touched right up to your hair so that it sticks under your hair, and then you'll rinse it all around, apply your shampoo, rinse it again, and then towel it off. It's pretty similar to washing your hair on the ground. The food that we eat on the International Space Station is delicious these days. It's really not that kind of freeze-dried ice cream thing that people have this idea that we eat. We have an entire lab at the NASA Johnson Space Center that is always developing new and delicious foods. And I was even a subject for an experiment up there called Food Physiology, where I had a whole different kind of menu. Things like more fishes, higher omega-3s, more lycopene, more vegetables. I would say the only thing that is lacking as sort of a foodie here on Earth is the presentation. You never forget that first moment when the hatch opens and you take your first movements out of the space station and into the void of space. Nothing else between my boots and the Earth below. And you get much more of a sense of motion when you're on a spacewalk, of how quickly we're moving, passing over the Earth. 17,500 miles per hour, going around the entire planet every 90 minutes. You're in this spacesuit and your body is kind of at a strange angle, and it's 450 pounds of mass that you need to move around, and every movement is pressurized with your hands. Every once in a while, though, you do need to remind yourself just to take a moment and enjoy what you're doing. Appreciate it. Christina and I both felt so privileged to have had any type of role in that historic event. And for us, I think it was the most important, not for our personal achievements, but really for the generations of women and minorities that were pushing the envelope when we didn't have a seat at the table. But that day, so many people were watching and so many people were excited. People of all ages, young girls, young boys too. And one of the things that it brought to mind was that anybody can accomplish their dream. No matter who we are, what we look like, or what our background is, those possibilities are open to everybody.
Do you have a question for NASA? Write us or send in your video using the hashtag AskNASA.
Okay, gonna go back to sharing. I love that video from her. It's a little long, but I think she shares a lot of good information and inspiration about, how we can all be a part of doing these big things. You may remember Jessica, she took this selfie in space that shows a reflection of herself off of the ISS solar arrays. She's pretty cool, and I think the video is funny that she says basically she has to get her astronaut friends to kind of potty train her in space to learn how to go to the bathroom. And I met a couple of other women astronauts at Kennedy Space Center, and that's Jess Watkins and Sunny Williams. And I have to say that Sunny disagrees with Jessica about the food on the ISS. She said it's bland, and she was super happy to be a part of harvesting some herbs and spices on the International Space Station to make the food taste a little bit better. But of course, she did it when it was first harvested, so they have to send those back to Earth to make sure they're safe to eat. But I always like this picture of Jess because perhaps she'll be the first woman on the moon, and that would be awesome. And Sunny Williams is going to be the commander of the first Boeing human space flight. So I think it was pretty monumental to meet those ladies at work. But today, the purpose here, we're going to talk about the Artemis program. So when NASA went to the moon, way back when in 1969, it was with the Apollo program. And Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo. So it's pretty aptly named because we're going to send the first woman to the moon as well as the next man. And it's going to be different this time because instead of only being able to land in a specific place, we're going to want to be able to land anywhere that we want to and collect resources and make sure basically that we can go to stay. So the reason we're going to the moon is we have Space Policy Directive number 1. And back in December of 2017, the president issued the Space Policy Directive, which is a national policy that provides for a US-led integrated program with our private commercial sector partners as well as international partners to establish a sustained presence on the moon and set us up to be able to get to Mars and deeper into space. And so it seems pretty aggressive that they would announce in 2017 they want to go to the moon, and that 2017 we're going to be able, 2024 we're going to be able to do that with so much dexterity. But this isn't the first time NASA has faced such a challenge. Back for the Apollo landing, it was just 1962 when President John F. Kennedy, who the Space Center I work at is named after, decided that we were going to be going to the moon. And by 1969, 7 years later, Neil Armstrong was there. So we're pretty sure we can do this. And a lot of times it depends what people's backgrounds are. I try to talk to people who are space enthusiasts and well as everybody else, because space exploration benefits everybody, not just people who want to go to space, but right here on Earth. So why are we doing this? And why are we trying to go to the moon? We want to go out there and eventually find out, are we alone here? But we have to develop a lot of technologies and capabilities and able to be able to do that. So we're going to start with the moon. It's kind of like our next natural progression from low Earth orbit, where the International Space Station is, to going to deep space. So we'll be in cislunar space, and we'll again continue. You know, America's really proud of our leadership in space, so we want to continue with that and inspire people to continue careers in STEM. And you know, the careers in STEM benefit us here on Earth, so we want to make sure that we're able to do these things to improve the quality of life here. It expands the U.S. economic impact, but also global impact with our international partners, and broadens our relationships, and kind of makes, I don't know, I guess the further we try to go out into space, it makes our Earth seem so small. So it's pretty important for us. So our administrator has put out a strategy, and you know, these are the key characteristics of our deep space plans. And it needs to be sustainable. We want to go to the moon and stay there this time. We want to use as much reusable components and elements as we can, so that we're not wasteful and we're being conservative. And we want to make sure that we can extend it from one step to the next and the next. And then we want to do that in a lean and agile way. It's pretty hard launching things into space. So we want to get out there and not have to bring too much stuff with us, but figure out how we can use the resources that are there to sustain our presence. So again, we kind of talked about it. You know, we're pretty proud about our leadership in this area. And I mean, this kind of endeavor has so many possibilities for partnerships and collaboration, and really bringing the world together and starting a new kind of program for how we're going to explore space. So like I said, this time we're going to go to the moon and we're going to stay there. And we're going to use we have a couple of things that are going to help us be able to do that. So we're going to be able to demonstrate our newest and most advanced crew capsule, which is the Orion capsule, that's going to take astronauts from Earth on the Space Launch System rocket. It will be the largest rocket that was ever built, and take the crew into the lunar vicinity. We're going to land the first woman on the lunar surface, which I'm really proud to be a part of. And we're going to do that with international and commercial partners. So it's not just, for one, it's for all. And we're going to build a platform called Gateway, which is basically a spaceship that's going to orbit the moon. And that's going to be our launch pad. So the Gateway is a modular spacecraft, and composed of two main components, which is the power and propulsion element that we call the PPE, and then the habitation and logistics outpost, which we call the HALO. I'll get into a little bit more about that, but those are a couple of key elements to our strategy. And just kind of looking at that whole overview from where we are to going to Mars, we've got to do a lot of testing and build our capabilities, kind of expand the possibilities of what we're able to do in terms of exploring the lunar surface. So instead of just being able to land on equatorial sites, we want to be able to go into places like the Shackleton crater near the South Pole, and see what kind of resources are available and see if we can use them to go further into deep space. We will build the Gateway out. So we start with the PPE and the HALO, but we have some other elements that can be added to it, or that actually kind of have to be added to it. They're key elements that will help us be able to have that presence there. We're going to build a surface habitat so that astronauts can live and work on the moon, and get around on the moon, and really make it easier for people to do that there. And hopefully this is going to be a dress rehearsal for our endeavors to Mars and beyond. So in order to get there, we got to know where we are. So, if you want to know where, how to get where you want to go, you got to know where you're starting from. So right now we have, as far as Earth orbit goes, we've been in low Earth orbit with ISS. And we're used to having astronauts there building in that orbit, in low Earth orbit. So we've really built our capabilities there. We need to get to where we can actually turn that low Earth orbit into a really robust commercial space economy. So we have commercial providers that will be bringing tourists to that area and really look at commercializing the International Space Station and just low Earth orbit. As far as lunar orbit goes, we've been gathering information since with science and experiments and rovers and orbiters, really trying to see what's on the moon. And that really hasn't stopped all this time since the landing in '69. So what we really want to do, though, is be able to establish sustainable human and robotic presence. So, set up someplace where people can live and work on the moon, and where we have autonomous vehicles that can get more information for us about the moon. We got to characterize that environment and really just make sure it's safe, and that there aren't any long-term effects of being there, and mitigate any if there are, and really explore what resources are there. Like I said, we want to do this in a conservative manner, and not wasteful. So see if there are resources that we can use and distribute that we find there. And hopefully everything that we learn will make it possible for us to get to Mars as quickly as possible. So in order to get to 2024, it's 2020 now. So we have 4 years left before we're supposed to land people on the moon, and that is pretty aggressive. So we kind of have to work these things in parallel. We've got the crew portion, but in order to sustain the crew there, we've got to have lots of cargo, supplies, and payloads and experiments to find out about the environment. And in order to do all of that by 2024, we have to look at those paths in parallel. So we're working on both now. Most of the crew programs and astronaut training and all of that is done at Johnson Space Center in Houston. So a lot of that is focused there. But Kennedy Space Center, we're where deep space logistics lives. So we're basically a deep space trucking company, and we're going to get cargo, payload, science, things that are going to be needed to sustain that presence. We're going to do that from Kennedy Space Center. And a lot of that does involve the PPE and HALO because that's the beginning of the gateway. So we'll help get those components into space, get them assembled in space. And we've had a couple of changes of plan based on assessing our progress. And, we have to be agile, like I said before, and flexible in order to achieve the goals. And we are focused on making sure that this is an open framework. It's, again, space is for everybody. And we've kind of learned a lot of lessons from the ISS program about how to test, how to make open standards that are interoperable and compatible for international partners, and how to engage the commercial community to help us get cargo and crew out to space. So this way, we'll be out in space. We can be open to not just being at the moon, but also heading off to Mars, and maybe beyond. So we'll, at least got to get started where we can kind of leverage the things that we know and the partnerships that we have in order to get further than we have. So we kind of use the base camp philosophy to do this. Like, if you think when someone's going to do something like, let's just say, climb Mount Everest, it's super high and it's kind of out of most people's reach. But in order to do this, we kind of set up a base camp in order to have a platform that we can go further from. So that's the same kind of philosophy we're using with Gateway. Gateway is our base camp in the lunar vicinity. So Gateway, again, like I told you, it's made up of a few elements. The main things are the power and propulsion element here that gives the thrust to keep the spacecraft in its orbit, and also the power to the modules that need power. It also has some communication capability, so helps astronauts and the spacecraft be able to communicate with Earth. The Orion crew module will bring the crew to the Gateway, and that can dock with the rendezvous and dock with the Gateway, and it does that autonomously. So that's pretty cool. And then we have the human landing system, which will take the astronauts from the Gateway down to the lunar surface. It docks to the Gateway. It can also dock to the Orion capsule. So if you think about it, the astronauts will come up from Earth on the Orion capsule, dock with the Gateway. They can either get into the human landing system by traveling through the tunnels in the Gateway, or the human landing system, it can autonomously dock to the backside of the Orion, and they can transfer into the human landing system that way. And then to get all the stuff up there that we need, that's us, Deep Space Logistics. We have a logistics module that also docks to the Gateway. And all of this is being done with, the Orion capsule is a NASA asset, and the PPE as well as the Halo, but the rest of it is really commercial services and international partners. Again, so we're using standards that make it so that they're open, that anybody out there who has access to information can find out what those standards are and be a part of it if they go through the process. So I work with Deep Space Logistics at Kennedy Space Center, kind of talk to you about that. And we really leverage the experience that Kennedy Space Center has with launch services. We can develop cargo payloads, we can integrate them into spacecrafts, we can test them and check out, and then we launch them. And so that's one of the unique skills that we have at Kennedy Space Center, and that makes it special. And so, like I said, we're kind of like just really simple, keep it, this cartoon here breaks it down pretty well. With Deep Space Logistics, we have a logistics module, and we are able to use that to transfer cargo and payloads, elements, like we're going to take the robotic arm that will be used on the Gateway, we'll take that up to the Gateway and assemble it there. And we can also carry fuel for any of the modules or visiting spacecrafts that need it. So this is how we're going to get our cargo from Earth to the Gateway. And so our first provider is SpaceX, and they're working, it's pretty similar what they're doing with the ISS. They transfer cargo from Earth to the ISS. And so building on that, they're able to do the same thing for us at the Gateway. So we'll have multiple missions that will bring cargo, elements, and doing this in a new way of doing business where we have, fixed prices for the services, and it's really end-to-end service that we provide for our customers as well as ourselves. So give you a quick overview of what the concept of operation is for the Gateway Logistics Service. So we have the design, development, and component testing that happens here on Earth. We integrate that into the spacecraft and the pre-launch operations. And then we go ahead and launch and activate the spacecraft where it goes in transit into the lunar vicinity. It'll arrive at the Gateway, which will be in its orbit. It'll stay there for docked operations for up to a year. Then it will undock and it be decommissioned and disposed of. So that's our basic standard concept of operations. We have a couple of other things that we can do. We can undock and go on a secondary mission, but this is the basic overview of a standard mission. And that is going to allow us to help crews live in space, bring science and experiments, materials, supplies, everything that they need. We'll be able to get samples from the lunar surface and bring it back to Earth to study them. And then the Gateway is in a particular orbit that's called a near rectilinear halo orbit, which there's a picture there, but we can go into other orbits and complete other operations, and also use the Gateway as a communications relay to supplement that line of sight visibility when the Earth is out of view for our lunar surface operations. So for Artemis 1, we're really just going to have an uncrewed flight test of the Orion spacecraft. So if you can follow along with the numbers here, we have at basically launch and getting into an Earth orbit. And then we're going to get out of our Earth orbit through a couple of burns and do what's called translunar injection and head into a lunar orbit. So we're going to do a flyby of the moon and then basically head back to Earth and splash down in the Pacific to basically demonstrate that our spacecraft and space launch system is safe to use. So that's kind of our first thing. This is also going to have some CubeSats that will deploy at these places where you see the letters A, B, C, and D. And that's, again, so we can collect more information about the transit and the lunar vicinity to make sure that it's safe and see if there's any resources or anything that we can use. So then our Artemis 2 mission is going to be a crewed mission, and it's going to also do a flyby. We still want to make sure it's safe, so we're going to let crew go, but we're still not going to land on the surface. And what's going to happen there, we're going to launch, again, from Kennedy Space Center, enter our Earth orbit. We'll go into a burn and go into a high Earth orbit, and then go to a translunar injection and get to our lunar flyby. We'll come back and head back and splash down into Earth. So make sure everything is safe. So this we'll get to go much closer to the lunar surface. We'll get a lot of information, and all of these missions we have lots of sensors, and we're collecting information just to make sure that we understand where we're going and what kind of things that we can see astronauts and our assets encounter and how to help them. And then Artemis 3, that's the big one we're all working towards, which is the 2024 moon landing with astronauts. And so again, we launch and take off, go into Earth orbit, and then we have translunar injection. And then we're going to get this right here, this red here where it says Gateway orbit. That's our near rectilinear halo orbit. And Gateway will be orbiting there. So our Orion spacecraft is going to dock to the Gateway here in the near rectilinear halo orbit. And then the astronauts will get into the human landing system like I described, and they'll go ahead and land on the lunar surface. So with the human landing system, it has basically, we'll just say it has a descent element and an ascent element. The descent element takes the astronauts down to the lunar surface, and the ascent element will take them back to the Gateway. They'll dock to the gateway, transfer themselves, their cargo, any samples, and all of that into the Orion capsule, and then head back to Earth and splash down. And, that's what we're all working for, that landing on the moon in 2024. So the strategy is pretty simple. We're looking to do all of this because we can learn so much by going to the moon before Mars. The moon takes about 3 days away from home. Well, that's one path, but at minimum, we could take 3 days to get away. And then we'll prove a lot of technologies and systems that we need to be sure that we can actually have a 2 to 3 year mission to Mars, because we'll be in a different position if we run into trouble on a Mars mission than we would be on a moon mission. So we want to kind of do this. It's kind of our proving ground. And so that's really what we're trying to do. We have the capability. We know what we want to do. We have the charge. The president told us we go. And it's really our job to explore this area of space for exploration purposes, but also for the benefits that we can have here on Earth. So we're working on it now. The plan is we're going to go with a gateway. That'll give us our platform. We'll go to the moon. That'll give us a deep space presence. And then that means we can go on to Mars if we can prove ourselves in those areas. And that's my Artemis overview.
Was I on mute? I was just checking to see if you were paying attention. Thank you so much. That was incredibly informative.
You're welcome.
I know a lot about the Artemis mission, and I've been following all the things that have been written there. Before we get into the questions, the big debate is why the moon first, and why not just go straight to Mars? We've been to the moon. It's so 1960s. Why don't we just go straight to the Mars and do it right? And I get that there's safety first and baby steps and let's take it slow. But the distance from here to the moon and the distance from the moon to Mars, it's negligible. So why do we really need to go to the moon to use that as a base to launch to Mars? It really isn't that much further away.
Well, I think the fact that we've been to the moon is part of why we want to go back. So again, you did mention the safety thing, and the safety is kind of our first charge with this. But if we can go someplace where we've already been, there's a level of comfortability there. So we're using a lot of heritage technologies to do that, but advancing them in such a way that we don't have to be limited in terms of where we can go on the moon. And that will help us to be able to do the same when we get to Mars. It's one thing to go to space and to go to the moon, and you can just go, like, imagine if you went to, let's just say if I traveled to South Africa and I could just go to, one particular spot, maybe not the most exciting spot. It'd be awesome for me to travel all that way, but if I'm going there, I want to be able to see as much as I can. So the same strategy kind of works on the moon. And when you add the safety factor in, I think that makes it most attractive. And it's interesting too, because I've heard a lot about, that our different political parties actually prefer different strategies. So they say that when we have Republican administrations, they want to go to the moon. And when we have Democratic administrations, they want to go to Mars. Have you ever heard that?
I didn't know that, but I'm
Okay.
not going to say which particular president. He might not need the opinion of scientists, so you never know who we're going to be choosing and which side we're going to go. But I've noticed we've got a couple of questions coming through. So
Okay.
I'm going to start off with Camille's question, and Camille would like to know, is microbial cross-contamination between Earth and the moon a concern at all? And if so, how is this mitigated during human trips to the lunar surface?
It's a good question. So it's certainly a concern, and even it's a concern when we're talking about going into low Earth orbit to the International Space Station. So we don't want to contaminate space with anything. So that's kind of a first key. Now, I used to work in biomedical engineering and research, and over there we worked, we had the crew quarters was kind of under our purview. And so when astronauts travel into space, they're actually quarantined anyway, and monitored, to make sure that they're healthy. So that's one thing. We don't want to transfer any kind of bacteria or germs or anything like that through that. And then pretty much everything we work with, like when we work with the payloads, we're working in pretty clean space areas. So we're making sure we're not getting, microbial substances, dust, anything like that. We don't want to take that out there. So we kind of mitigate it by working in clean spaces. We have foreign object debris protocols, clean space protocols, and it's a lot. You'll see, that's why you see those people dressed up, and even when loading cargo, with the little scrubs and hats and clean suits on to make sure that they're not transferring anything into onto the cargo and then into space. So I hope that answers your question.
It sounded like it did to me, but we certainly don't want to take COVID anywhere. We'd rather leave
Exactly.
that part on Earth. We have a question from Aiden, and Aiden would like to know, do you ever get used to how insane and cool it is that we're landing on the moon and Mars, well, moon again and Mars for the first time? I mean, it just almost seems so surreal.
It does. I'll have to say that sometimes when I'm at work, I kind of forget that it is work. And, we do a lot of continuing training and things like that. So we get to do exercises like, talking about, well, we're going to set up a base camp and we need to bring these things. And it almost seems a little bit like play because it is so cool. So I don't know if I get used to it. I don't think I will. Sometimes I guess, like last week I had to go in and I had to move some equipment around for the ISS program and get some stuff calibrated. And it was really kind of not it's not the glamorous NASA work. It was the grunt work. But I went and I did it, and I did it pretty happily though, because I'm like, doing this work is what enables me to do the fun stuff that I love. So yeah, it's pretty cool, and I'm happy to be a part of it. And one thing I want to say, sorry, before we go to the next question that I forgot to say at the beginning here, is I want to congratulate you, SAAO, on your 200th anniversary, your partnership with SciFest. I'm really happy to be here and be a part of this again, because my visits to SciFest are some of the fondest memories that I have, and I'm excited to be able to come back. And this year it had to be this way, but hopefully I'll be back soon. So I want to thank you for inviting me to do this, Pran and Freddie and Steve and Ryan, and hosting me. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. We have a question from Loic, and he is 6 years old and would like to know, will the moon station be an international station just like the ISS, or just a NASA station?
It will be an international station. So, and I'm glad you asked that. So it will be international. We have international partners. We're using standards that are open to all of our international partners. We have, I think, 8 or 9 countries now that have signed the Artemis Accord that are a part of kind of our partnership to go into deep space. And what other thing do I want to say about that? Yeah, I mean, it's really important that we do this with an international collaboration, because, we can go, I guess, I don't know, I heard the proverb, I think if you want to go, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So that's what we're doing. We're going to go together.
Or if you want to go fast, just build a bigger rocket. But here's the thing.
No.
I mean, I know we've got a bunch of questions, but this is the one thing that always boggles my mind. Because no one owns the moon or Mars, if we send up a US rocket with a international crew to go to the moon and stay in internationally built quarters, and someone grabs a rock and maybe does something or commits a crime or an accident, what laws do we put in place? I mean, are there laws or rules on the moon or Mars that we need to adhere to before we even get there?
So the UN has some kind of regulations that are in place about space and what we do there. It's not very detailed. So I mean, if somebody picked up a rock and hit somebody, there's no space police yet. So I guess they'll just have to work that out like adults at this point. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of all to be established. There's so many things, I talked about developing crew and cargo capabilities in parallel, but that's really just a snapshot. There's a lot of things going on in parallel. We've got all kinds of standards that we're developing just to make this possible. One of the things that probably makes those kind of laws and regulations a little less imperative is just that there's not too many people that have the means to get to space. So we're pretty much vetting everyone who's going out there because they need to go through us or one of our trusted partners to get there.
Okay. Jacqueline would like to know, do you know if shows like Away on Netflix work with organizations like NASA to make sure that they are accurate in some way? Because she said she knows that The Martian was backed by NASA, but there are a few more TV shows and movies coming out these days. And obviously Mars seems to be the flavor of the month because a lot of these sorts of programs are coming out. So what sort of collaboration takes place to get more integrity and accuracy for these shows? There's The Right Stuff, there's Away, all these shows that are coming out now on Netflix, for example.
So one thing that's nice about, most of what NASA does, and at least the information, is that, it's taxpayer funded. And so it belongs to the people. So we do have, as citizens, have access to it. Now, it's not the easiest thing to actually figure out how to get to what you're looking for. But if you're wanting to do that and committed, it's possible. So we do work with, people making movies to do that. And I think I've heard that there's a movie star who will be going to film on the International Space Station for a movie soon. So I don't know if I don't think they've announced that yet, but I heard that that's what's happening. So, okay. So yeah.
It's been all over the press, all over the world.
Okay. So yeah, awesome. Then so I mean, that's one example of a collaboration that we have so that it can be realistic, because it's actually going to be in a real life space asset, not just a set. So I mean, if people want to find out, we have public relations offices. We have librarians and people whose job it is to really know how to find the information that people who are doing any kind of research are looking for.
Well, I mean, a lot of people are saying, why would you send up a Hollywood star to the space station in the first place when you've got such wonderful CGI and they can be very convincing? But I suppose that's a completely different debate. Here comes a question from Camille. How does the space launch system compare with Saturn V in terms of fuel type and thrust possibility?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I know that it has a lot more thrust, and we can go farther. Now, I'm not really sure about the fuel type, the differences there, but I know with, if we could get to deep space with a Saturn V, and we felt that we could reliably do that within a good cost, then why would we build a space launch system? So obviously we need it to get where we want to go. I think that, though, by the time we finish the space launch system, there may actually be bigger rockets out there. So that's, kind of what happens when things don't go exactly as planned. But we're basically trying to build the biggest rocket that we know of at this point to take us farther than we've ever been able to go with humans safely. So, and that's another thing, I think, the safety concerns. So when I think about it that way, I'm sure that the space launch system uses fuels that, at least in that first stage, that are safer when you're having crew near them, because those hypergalls are pretty nasty things that we don't want people anywhere near.
Okay. We have another question from Camille, and Camille would like to know, has it been purely a technological improvement that has allowed for the gateway and a gateway orbit, or does it stem from a policy change? and just maybe a different idea of lunar exploration?
Well, so I think there are some technology improvements that have allowed for Gateway. Number one, like if you think about the International Space Station really being assembled in space, that was a big deal, and it was the first time it was done. So we've learned a lot from doing that, repairing things in space, doing spacewalks, have hosting astronauts for long periods of time. So I mean, we've definitely improved technologically. With the space station to be able to do some of the things we'll do with Gateway. The Gateway orbit is more about stability and station keeping costs. So it may not actually, it's debatable whether or not that's the best orbit. But when we start talking about the things that we have to do in space, it takes a lot of fuel to get in some of these orbits. I think ideally we'd be in a low lunar orbit where we're close to the surface, so that enhances our communications capability and reduces our needs for power, but it increases engineering. It's always about trade-offs. So then it increases our station keeping costs, which means we need more fuel or more power to actually stay in our orbit. So the NRHO orbit, which is NRHO it's a family of orbits, and there are, I think, 4 of them. So we have a south one that tilts to the right, and we have a south one that tilts to the left, and then a northern NRHO that tilts to the left and tilts to the right. And in those, we have an infinite number of possibilities. So it's a style of orbit, and it's chosen basically because when we look at the trade-offs, it's within our realm of something that we can do safely with such a big spacecraft. Now, we'll have other things that are in other orbits, like we'll need communications relays to make sure that we are able to keep our astronauts when they're in orbit, as well as on the surface and in the lunar vicinity, in communication with Earth. So we'll have orbits, and they might go into things like 12-hour frozen orbits or low lunar orbits to basically be able to collect that communications information and send it down to Earth in an orderly fashion to the ground stations.
Well, knowing how space changes on a rapid basis, one day we are launching a rocket, then the next day we are landing 2 boosters vertically. I mean, things just keep changing and evolving at a rapid speed. Christian would like to know, when do you think the first people will actually set foot on Mars? If you were a betting person, when do you think it might happen?
I would say I'll say somewhere between around 2040. I honestly, that's my opinion.
So if we're talking another 20 years from now, and
to send people.
And you still in your 20s, does that mean you're going to apply to be one of those people who are going to be walking on Mars?
No. So it's funny, I'm not adventurous in that way. And people ask me all the time, I feel really secure in my identity as an earthling. So I feel like I belong here, but one thing about Earth, I care a lot about the Earth, and there's a lot going on, that's not so great with the Earth. And the only way for any of us to see what's going on with it is to get off of the Earth. So that's kind of my interest in space, is how it gives us that vantage point to look at the Earth and examine it and figure out how we can make life here better.
Sure. Well,
so look, what about you, Steve? Would you like to go?
Well, first of all, I'm certainly the shape of a planet, so at least I've got something in common with them. But if I was given an opportunity, let's pretend they said we're choosing someone randomly out of some lottery, and we would like to take someone up, I would do it in a heartbeat. No hesitation whatsoever. But you know what the irony is? I think that if you wait a while, commercial space travel is going to get cheaper and cheaper, and soon many of us in the next decade or 2 will be able to afford maybe more than a suborbital flight and actually get to float around space for 40 minutes and get to experience weightlessness. But going to Mars is not an easy journey.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried traveling to the Eastern Cape with 2 kids in the back? It's a nightmare. I can't imagine 7 to 9 months in a rocket. It would be really, really difficult. So, I'm not sure if I could pull that off, but I could certainly get excited about the idea of travel to a different planet, but certainly not a 7 to 9 month journey. I think that would be a little bit
Me
off-putting to
either.
me.
Well,
You know what? There's
I
a place for us, and I'll tell you why. Every tent needs to have a tent peg below the ground holding the tent up. No one really gets to see the tent peg. They are always looking at the tent going, oh, what a marvelous tent. But those tent pegs
exactly.
play an important role. So those people are doing research and doing all the behind the scenes stuff. You are certainly valued. You just don't get, the kind of public recognition that the people who wear the spacesuits get.
Well, when I worked in the biomedical engineering and research lab, and we have take a child to work day. So you do stuff like I would go into the crew quarters and put on astronaut suits and let the kids come in and put on astronaut suits and so we can pretend. So to some of our friends and family, we do those things. They don't know that, so it's almost like, yeah. So, I mean, for me, that stuff is fun, but I guess I'm just not, I don't know. I don't have it in me. So I like to be that person behind the scenes, but I do feel really proud to be helping people get there. And one of the things for me is that it's really important to have these questions. I've never been able to work in a place where these are the kinds of questions that people are going to ask me. So, I mean, where else can you work where people are going to ask you stuff like this? How can astronauts talk to the Earth when they're on the moon in a crater?
Well, they can, because Nokia are building 4G
Yeah.
masts on the moon, which means you can actually make a cell phone call from the moon. Can you imagine getting a text message or a phone call? Hi, yes, it's so-and-so from the moon. Would you like to take, certainly call collect, but I mean, that's how technology is moving. Now, Aiden
Well,
wants
so
to
like,
know.
go
Oh,
ahead,
yes,
go ahead. Sorry. Well, I was going
sorry.
to say about that Nokia, it's interesting because we're really looking at making what we're calling a LunaNet, which is a moon version of our terrestrial internet. And we're going to use some of the resources that we have, at play with our internet and communication systems here on Earth, using some weak signal GSS and things like that to be able to help with communications at the moon. So I think it's pretty exciting, and by doing this, we get to be able to do it quickly and then very easily expand that into Mars. So
What
that's
about
one of the
Starlink?
perfect things. Well, Starlink, at this point, they're not in. We could probably use some of their weak signals, but they're not going to be in position for us except to use as a relay. So we might be able to see some of the Starlink assets from the moon, but they wouldn't be able to capture the signals that we need to transmit from the lunar vicinity down to Earth. But we could use them kind of almost like storage, because it starts to get crowded with the ground stations with all of these different assets trying to communicate with a limited number of ground station assets. So, we need those big 34-meter dishes and 18-meter dishes in order to do this. And there's not, they're multi-millions of dollars. And so there's not enough of them really to handle what we think all the communications traffic will end up being. So that's why we're working on these strategies to basically handle that traffic. So we're not basically dropping calls all the time and asking, yeah, can you hear me now? We don't want to do that.
Aiden wanted to know, what has been the most difficult technological challenge to overcome so far?
So that's one of those things that's hard to say the most difficult. So one project that I worked on, it wasn't difficult. It was difficult, okay, but it was more that it was sensitive. So there are two actually, and they both involve electromagnetics. So the first one is something I worked on at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and basically I was designing a test setup to figure out how capacitors would behave in cryogenic temperatures that's really cold, like in space. So basically, so we could free up some of our mass resources so we don't have to put all of our computing information and close it in temperature sensitive cases with heaters. So we want to see, well, what happens if we don't put them in there? So somehow I have to get these capacitors in down to cryogenic temperatures, and I can't do it just by dropping it into like some cryogenic liquid. I really need to create that cold environment. So in order to do that, I need to hook them up to machines, and that takes wires, and then those wires create all kinds of parasitic effects with my test equipment that make it so that instead of measuring the capacitor's performance, I'm basically measuring my wire's performance. So figuring out how I would be able to do that to get my capacitor inside of what we call a cold oven, while it's attached to my instruments that I need to measure their performance without interfering with the actual capacitor performance, was very challenging, because things like the lights in the room would create effects that were impacting my results. So in the end, I actually had to, I couldn't do it physically. So what I did was figure out what the effects of my wires and connectors were, and then mathematically de-embed them from my results to get the information I needed. So that was a pretty tough one. And another one is I worked on what's called a liquid air backpack. And the liquid air backpack is something that an astronaut could use, or someone maybe in a toxic environment here on Earth could use. And it basically has air in its liquid form, which is cryogenic. So it's really cold. We put it in some containers that they can put into a backpack, and they can carry around 6 hours of breathable air in a backpack. So the reason why we like it when it's cold and liquid is because when it's so cold like that, it compresses and we can fit a lot of breathable air in a small space. So inside of the dewar, let's say a tube this yay big and yay around, we're able, that liquid expands to about 800 times its volume in there to provide that much breathable air. So I needed to figure out how much liquid is inside of the dewar at all times, but it's not see-through, and it's a little bit different than just a big tank because someone is wearing it, and so they're not always standing up straight. So sometimes if they're tilted like this, the liquid be at this level. So if I just try to measure it here, I would think there's less liquid in there than it actually is. So figuring out how to do that with a little microcontroller and some wires and things like that, that was a pretty good challenge, but something I really liked working on. So I guess those are two good challenges.
Two things that I've learned is that when ice cream is cold and compressed, your stomach is one size, and when it all gets melted, then obviously it does have an impact. And two, you're obviously very keen on problem solving. So maybe you want to give a message out to the young people that are watching today. What are the kinds of things they should be focusing on to go into a career like yours, working for a space agency?
So the first thing I would definitely say is the problem solving aspect is, that's what we do, is they give us a problem and we solve it. So that is the job. So you definitely gotta, I mean, you don't have to start out loving it, but eventually you're going to have to get good at it and at least not be intimidated by it. So I would say is to try to look at, problems and challenges with, some enthusiasm. I look at it that way, and I haven't always been that way. A lot of times I would encounter problems, and I mean, it could be math problems or problems with my friends or problems with my family, and I'd get upset. But I kind of had to change my mindset and to look at those things as opportunities. So, I mean, I think the first step is how you approach it. So for me now, when someone comes to me with a problem, I just look at it as something to be solved, not something to fret about. So your mindset is it's so much of how things work out. Now there's obviously you have to do the work. So you're going to have to work on your skills, and everybody's not just naturally good at math. I guess I'm probably naturally okay at math, but I definitely have struggled in math classes. So I would say that don't think that because you're struggling with the topic that that means that, you're not cut out for this. So really just look at applying yourself, because you can pretty much do anything if you do apply yourself. And that's what I did. So I'll say I didn't struggle with the math class until I was in college. And I wished I had struggled sooner, because I didn't know how to study and I didn't know how to um, become good at something that didn't come naturally to me. And it was really frustrating and it made me want to quit. So I would say, again, look at your challenges now as an opportunity to become good at facing challenges themselves. And never count yourself out. So you have the opportunity to do anything that you want to do. You have to figure out what that is. And if you really want to do it, and if you commit yourself to it, for me, and maybe it's not always true, but for me, I found that it's always been true that the more that I focus on something, it comes to be. If I can't fail if I don't quit, so I don't quit.
I
That's
love
kind
it.
of how I live.
That is just phenomenal advice, and that also coincides with the fact that sadly our interview is coming to an end. I would like to thank all of the viewers who are submitting questions, but more importantly, I need to thank Bianca, because she is incredibly supportive of SciFest. She has been coming. How many SciFests have you been to?
2, and I want to come every year. I love South Africa. You guys have so much to be proud of. I keep track of, I heard that some people from NASA came recently or not too long ago about getting access for lunar communications and selecting some sites. So I'm always so happy to hear when we're partnering with South Africa. Because it just makes me proud, and I love the people there and the place, and I can't wait to get back. So
And of course, you are based at JSC, is that correct?
I'm at Kennedy Space Center here in Central Florida.
So that means if we come out that side, we can come and get a behind the scenes tour.
I mean, I'll do it, Steve.
Yes.
I'll do it. So yeah.
We'll chat about that one. All right. And on that note, I just want to remind you all that SciFest Africa has got an incredible collaboration going on with SAAO, and they are hosting a bunch of things. I just want to mention 1 or 2 that I have here on my email. For those of you who have not subscribed, you need to subscribe so that you know exactly what's going on. I know we've got another talk coming up on Wednesday, the 21st of October. This is going to be the best practices for science communication using digital platforms. We've got another lecture on the future of cosmology and natural science. And we've also got a webinar on the search for the signs of life beyond Earth with Professor Sarah Seeger from MIT. We've got incredible speakers. Just like Bianca, you're going to get a chance to access world-class speakers who know their stuff. And if you have not signed in and signed up for all of these things, you will obviously not know about it. You can always go to the following website at scifest.nationalartsfestival.co.za. And I do know that if you go onto scifest.org.za, you can also click on their 2020 online program, and you can see those particular talks and sign up and register for all of those. And on that note, Bianca, we'd like to say thank you very much to the technical team. Thank you so much for all your support. We had Freddie, Korbisa, we had Pran, and we had Ryan, of course, and Nicole. And thank you so much to all of you that listened and paid attention. We will be doing a quiz later on this afternoon. So I hope that you've been taking all your notes. And on that note,
I hope I get 100.
Oh, you're going to get more than that. And on that note, we're going to bid you all farewell. So thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye, everyone.